What we did in the last video is we used the built-in EF core to create the mapping table. But what if we want to create that mapping table ourselves? How can we do that? For that, we basically have to create the book author table, and we have to explicitly define the foreign key. We already know how to define the foreign key in one-to-many. So let me create that mapping table and see that in action. In the models here, we will add a new class. For naming, I will call that book author map, and it will be a public class. There we need an integer which will be book underscore ID, and we need another integer which will be author underscore ID. We need navigation property for both of them. So book, let me call that as book, and we have author, I will call it the same. We need to explicitly define the mapping for foreign key here. So foreign key, the navigation property for book ID is book. Copy that and paste that for author ID. The navigation property is author. Now on this table, if you want to add more properties like maybe created date or something like that, you can of course do that because you have full control. But we will keep things simple right here. If we go to author here, rather than book here, it will be a list of book author map. Copy that. Same will happen with the book class. And rather than calling book here, I will call that as book authors. Let me call that book author and not authors, or I'll call that book author map. That is more meaningful. Perfect. Now with that, if we try to add a migration, it will not work. I will call that add manual mapping table many-to-many book author. And great, we get the error message. The entity type book author map requires a primary key to be defined. Now what will be the primary key in this case? We have two columns here. We cannot keep book ID as primary key or author ID because there can be many books for an author or many authors for a book. So both of the columns will have duplicates. But there will never be a record which will be duplicate for both book ID and author ID. So if we combine both book ID and author ID, that can be a primary key. So here we need a composite key rather than single column as a primary key. Now you would think that we can use key data annotation in both the places. Let me show you what happens when we do that. With that configured, let me add the migration once again. And great, we still have that error message, and it says the entity type book author map has multiple properties with key. The main issue here is when we have to add composite key, that too on foreign keys here. It can be done using Fluent API. Now you might be wondering, what is Fluent API? Let me remove the key that we added right here. We have already seen one way of doing things with Fluent API, and that will be inside application DB context. If we scroll down here on the on model creating, the way we set precision here, that was done using Fluent API. Similarly, we can work on any table and we can perform all the data annotations using Fluent API. We will cover a lot more on that in the next video, but first thing, how do we set a composite key using Fluent API? We have to use model builder and we have to define the entity. That is the book author map. On there we have a method has key, and there we have to define what key we want. So the key that we want is a composite key, which is comprised of author ID, comma, u dot we have book ID. And here we need the new keyword. Let me add that. Perfect. With that, the composite key will be defined. To see that in action, let me add the migration once again, and it should complete successfully this time. Perfect, you can see it worked. Here it is now dropping the author book table because we no longer need the automatic mapping. Entity Framework code detects that we are manually creating a mapping for many-to-many relation. The primary key here is author ID and book ID, and we have foreign key and index. So that is great. Let's update the database. Now if we go back to SQL Server, author book table will be deleted. Let me refresh here, and we have the book author map table. Columns, we have the book ID and author ID. So great. With that, we have created many-to-many relation, and we have manually created the mapping table. Now if you were using version before .NET 5, then this is the only route that you could have taken. There was no automatic mapping table that could have been created before .NET 5. So keep that in mind as well. With that configured, let me examine the diagram once again to make sure everything is looking great so far. Perfect, we have the book author map table with one-to-many relation. We have book and book detail with one-to-one, and publisher and book shares one-to-many relation. With that, let me continue from the next video.